Hello, Indiana fans, and welcome to an impromptu edition of the Indiana Hoosiers Roundtable podcast. I'm Brandon Brown, joined as always by Todd Golden and Jack Ankony. And fellas, we talked about this just a couple days ago. We said we'll see you next week unless, and then a pretty big unless happened. Indiana did not wait long at all. They have hired their next head basketball coach in Darian DeVries, and you guys both informed me very, very succinctly that it is Darren, not Darian. I'm sure he's been called that about a million times in his life, but Darian DeVries, now the head coach at Indiana. And I guess we'll start with you, Jack. I guess what was the reaction? Obviously, this happened pretty fast, and we were kind of waiting and seeing if we were going to even have to talk about this next week, and now it's done and it's official.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was probably fair to say a little bit surprising. Like, I don't think he was the name that a ton of people were pining for and talking about for a lot of the process. But I think my reaction was that they're getting a solid coach who I think the biggest thing I've been sort of to look at it in a positive light is how he was able to take really a tough situation at West Virginia. They had an interim coach last year after Bob Huggins resigned when he got arrested, and they won like 9 games last year. And he won 19 games with his son, who was one of their better players, getting injured and only playing like 8 games. Drake was historically not a strong program, and he won immediately there, 24 games, went to 3 tournaments. So I think, I don't have a super strong opinion like, oh, they're going to win multiple national championships or go to the Final Four, or the other end of this is going to fail. I mean, I'm kind of in a wait and see with that. But I think that the reaction was that Indiana sort of, just got a solid coach who's kind of a no-nonsense guy. And I think there's reason to believe that it'll turn out well for him.
Todd, I like I said, we weren't quite sure, I guess. Yeah, kind of some of the same stuff Jack said. Are you surprised by the name? Are you surprised by the timeline? Did any of this really kind of shake you to your core, or is this kind of what you thought might happen?
I thought it would be a coach kind of like Darian DeVries, where, anybody who would be considered a home run hire either isn't interested or Indiana isn't able to get them. So I thought it would be, I put Darian DeVries in the same category as Ben McCollum and Brad Brownell to some extent in terms of how appealing they are to the fan base at large. Not a lot of fans probably until, the last 24 hours knew much about Darian DeVries. I was different. I covered the Missouri Valley Conference, and Darian DeVries was in that conference for most of his career. Including I was there for most of his years when he coached Drake. So I was personally familiar with him. And my initial reaction when it heated up was, oh, yeah, I mean, he took a Drake program that was complete garbage, really, for most of its modern history and turned it into an immediate winner, something that's very difficult to do. I mean, Drake was kind of the Northwestern of the Missouri Valley Conference, a lot of similarities in both academic outlook and resources and not a very good basketball history since the 1970s. So to do what he did there and then to sort of replicate it at West Virginia with the circumstances that Jack pointed out, I've thought to myself, and I wrote the story back in February too, he probably wouldn't be the first choice, but if he is the choice, it's not a bad choice. So, we'll see if he can replicate what he did at those institutions at IU, but I have a somewhat positive reaction to his being hired here.
Earlier in the week when we were talking about who might be the guy, I asked both of you, what would be on your checklist if you were picking a coach for Indiana, what would be like you have to have A, B, and C. And Jack, I think you said something about an identity. I think both of you kind of both hinted around that. That was one of the reasons why there was some inconsistency with Indiana this year. It didn't seem like they knew what they wanted to do all the time, and they kind of flip-flopped and changed things around. So I guess we'll start there. Does he seem to have an identity? Do you know what this dude's all about as a coach, and why would the other reasons be that Indiana wanted him?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look kind of statistically at his teams, he's historically had some really strong defenses. Like West Virginia had a top 15 defense this season. And then offensively, when he was asked today during the press conference about kind of what he wants that to look like, and he was very clear in sort of being like, we want to try to score in the first 12 seconds of the possession, so kind of play more of an up-tempo style and then get the best shot available. I think he prioritizes three-point shooting and just shooting in general. He emphasized that a few times. So I think a lot of the answers that we got in terms of, he also mentioned like just the importance of not compromising the type of player too, in terms of getting high character guys like you saying, the locker room is very important. So he had a lot of very clear and I think like non-generic answers about how he wants them to play, which is kind of a breath of fresh air, because it felt like a lot of this last season and 2 seasons ago, it was sort of like Indiana was sort of going into the seasons being like, all right, we're going to kind of figure it out as we go along, and didn't maybe have quite as clear of a plan as it seems that DeVries has initially.
Todd, I'll ask it to you in a slightly different way, I guess. Then, do you now expect then, whatever the roster looks like, and that we'll talk about that as well, because obviously when you get a coaching change, you can usually get a lot of roster turnover as well. But without knowing exactly what the roster is going to look like, do you think the product on the floor next year under DeVries will look significantly different than it did under Woodson? Or how much of a change are we talking now here for Indiana basketball?
Yeah, I think it will, in the sense that the pieces are going to fit together in a more sensible way than they did under Woodson. One of the things that Darian DeVries mentioned today was, I'm not just going to go grab guys. I'm going to grab guys that fit A, what we want to do, and B, with each other. Well, you might as well be sending out a klaxon to Indiana fans who, criticized Mike Woodson, and rightfully so, for kind of just amassing talent and hoping it worked out. I mean, that never, without a philosophy behind it, that never really was going to work very well. So, a lot of the things that DeVries said today, and it's natural. I mean, when you replace a coach who is perceived to have not reached a standard, as Mike Woodson is perceived to have not reached, naturally you're going to go for a coach that has traits that are opposite to what Mike Woodson represented. I just literally published a column about that Darian DeVries' devotion to having multiple three-point shooters on the roster is, not necessarily, it's not that Mike Woodson didn't want those shooters, but he didn't emphasize it enough. And so oftentimes they didn't have enough shooters. So that might as well have been, a message to fans that, we're going to do things a little bit differently than we had. So I do think it'll be different. I do hope the pieces fit together better. My guess is that, he'll bring a few guys over from West Virginia because he knows what he has in his hands, and then build around that. So, I think it's going to be more coherent than the kind of flying by the seat of the pants ethos that the Mike Woodson era represented, for better or worse. I mean, Woodson got talent. It's not that he didn't, and I'm not trying to knock him completely, but oftentimes the plan around the talent is what was missing. So I think with DeVries, that's going to be a little bit different.
Well, you guys have both answered this a little bit already, but Jack, what kind of a coach is he? What kind of a coach is he? What kind of a dude is he? What's his personality? Like you mentioned, prioritizing 3-point shooting, which I don't know how any coach can not do that in today's, basketball, and then defense as well. But yeah, kind of break him down as a guy and as a coach.
Yeah, I don't think he is a super rah, get the fan base fired up, create all this sort of excitement because partly because I don't think he needs to. Like, I was sort of thinking to myself, comparing it to, we just went through this process with Curt Cignetti on the football side, and like he talked about needing to kind of wake up the fan base. And IU basketball is very different from football, and from the standpoint of the fan base is already there, and there's people that no matter what are going to be very passionate about it. So I see DeVries is sort of like a no nonsense guy. I mean, he, I don't think he's just going to be out here kind of saying, crazy stuff just to grab headlines. Like I think Dolson talked about, he went through and talked to former players or different coaches and stuff, and everything came back like high character guy, great guy. So I think that was important in their process, not getting someone with sort of like a history of controversy or stuff like that. Like he checks out in all of in those type of areas. So I don't think he's going to be out here being all flashy or anything like that. I think he is everyone has talked about like his work ethic and stuff like that being very high. And I was actually listening to like the Field of 68 podcast yesterday when they were having Doug McDermott on it, because he played when DeVries was a assistant coach at Creighton, and he had a ton of good stuff to say just about how he recruited Doug to Creighton before Doug's dad was already there, and he was like, even before that, I really wanted to play. And I just thought he had a lot of good stuff to say about his work ethic and kind of his personality and things like that.
Well, Todd, I know one of the things that you talked about, I think we kind of all mentioned it, and I referred even back to when Michigan hired Juwan Howard, and it was the same thing with Mike Woodson. No previous head coaching experience at the college level. Well, obviously DeVries has that. Does that feel like that was one of the top points for Indiana here? And how confident are you that he can do this at a place like Indiana after having success at Drake? And then it's only a 1 year, I guess, snapshot of, at West Virginia, but the fact that he's had success as a head coach before makes you feel what?
Yeah, I think it makes a big difference. I mean, what I saw today in terms of how that vision is presented, in the sense of what DeVries and his own self-belief and confidence in his methods, he was a lot like Kurt Signetti in that sense. Personality-wise, he's nothing at all like Kurt Signetti. He's not going to be saying "Google me" or
maybe my favorite line of all time. No joke.
Yeah, I mean, that's just not what he's going to do. That's not who he is. So he reminds me of somebody who, like, say, like a doctor or something, a research doctor or scientist who believes in a method that they have and they want to present it and want to present it at the the highest level that's possible for in their field. DeVries strikes me as somebody who has that similar kind of confidence in what he could bring to the table in terms of approach and X's and O's and things like that. So that's the vibe I got off of him. And he's going to depend. He's a steady hand on the tiller is what he is. And that's something that Indiana needs because, whether you liked Mike Woodson or whether you didn't, it never felt steady during his time here. It always felt like it was kind of veering from really good to really bad. And not that DeVries, he can't go 500 or anything like that, but it does seem like, DeVries has a method that he believes in, and that's something that Indiana has not had in a coach, in the Woodson era. So I think it's important. I think it's going to be backed up with the resources that Indiana has. DeVries has to do it too. I mean, he's got one thing, his track record does do in terms of turning around Drake and having turning around West Virginia in the 1 year he had. He's got to do it here now. And so his methods have better work because in a way his record has set him up to have high expectations for what comes next year.
I also thought just from like a personality standpoint, like he at least answered it well, and this is probably easier said than done, but just kind of about the questions of the expectations, and people talk about Indiana being a high pressure job and like a fishbowl, people say, and he was like, well, I'm glad that everyone wants to win because no one wants to win like as much as I do. So like I think and he also talked about embracing Indiana's past. Like I think that's important in terms of just not wanting to run away from expectations and things like that, and obviously easier said than done, but I thought those two questions were kind of something that I wondered, just since I think that's part of why maybe the Archie Miller era didn't totally work out. So I think that'll be important for him in terms of like handling the pressure and helping his players handle it too, because I feel like this season there was some mention of like how that kind of got to him, and for some of the new guys here that didn't totally realize that aspect of Indiana.
Well, Jack, I'll ask you this too. It's, press conferences can be, sometimes I feel like they give you a lot of really good information, and other times you just are like, that was a press conference. I mean, it is what it is. They say what they say, and you just take it with a grain of salt. How did the presser go? How did it feel? How did he feel? You just gave a couple examples of his quotes and how he fielded a couple tough questions, but this is all you have right now. It's very new, so people break it down to the word. What was the vibe, in that room and then afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think the vibe was pretty even keel. Like we talked about, he's not out here, being like Google me. He's a pretty serious guy. Um, I don't think he was trying to get people overly excited for any reason. He was sort of just like, "This is my plan, and this is how we're going to do it." I thought the one quote that people probably got excited about, he was talking about how, um, you know, uh, when people can watch our team and on a nightly basis, they take a lot of great pride and say that this is my team. He said that's when the banners will rise again. Like that was kind of his, flashy thing, which I think is important because part of the disdain I feel like some Indiana fans had with like really the last Archie Miller and Mike Woodson was that they just didn't play, or not all the time, but a lot of the time just didn't play a style that they felt like, inspired by and that they could really get behind. So I think he's coming into it wanting to change that and kind of build a product that people will enjoy watching.
And Todd, this is, I guess, kind of a surface level question, but like I said, when a new coach is hired, you have the introductory press conference, and that's really it for a little while. I mean, I don't know what other availability you guys will get, and basketball season just wrapped up, so we'll see. But how important do you think that is, that the coach comes in, nails the press conference, wins over the fan base in some way, shape, or form, talks about specifics, seems competent? I mean, all of those things have to play into how he's received, and it is day one. So how important do you think that is, and how do you think he did overall?
It's more important than I like to think it is. I think the substance of what you do down the line is what really matters. I mean, think about it this way. Let's say Curt Cignetti went 3-9 this past season. All that brashness that he did at his press conference would have looked stupid. And the fact that we remember it and that he went 10-3 means that he backed up his words. Simple as that. Darian DeVries today, there was no drama. Let's be honest, it was a little bit boring. I mean, but boring is probably what Indiana needs right now. They need somebody like that. They need, somebody who isn't going to sell anybody a line. They need somebody who's steady, and Darian DeVries is steady. So steady doesn't make for great sound bites, but steady does often win you games. So, we'll see this time next year. Whether the confidence in his methods is backed up by the results. And that's what ultimately matters. I mean, you can lose a press conference. I certainly don't think Darian DeVries did anything to lose the press today. But winning the press conference, yes, it matters. You want to make a good first impression, but the substance of what he accomplishes next year is what's way more important.
And also very important will be, who he surrounds himself with, his staff, and obviously the roster. And we'll close with that. It's early. Again, it's day one. There's already been a couple of announcements. Malik Renew jumped into the transfer portal, and we'll see what continues to happen from here on out. But Jack, the roster is, I mean, that's the whole thing. I mean, who's out on the court, who's playing, who's making the plays for the new coach and the new system. So what do you foresee for the roster? I think you mentioned DeVries' son a little bit already. Just the thoughts on what the roster might look like when it comes time to actually get out on the court and play some ball.
Yeah, so I think there's been some reporting that like a lot of people expect his son Tucker DeVries to come with him to Indiana. It's not nothing on that I guess has been official yet, but I mean he followed Darren from Drake to West Virginia, and this year he was hurt for most of the season, but could probably be able to get a medical year of another eligibility. But he's kind of like a guard / small forward, really good 3-point shooter, was a 2-time Missouri Valley Player of the Year. So if they could get him to come along board, that would be a really nice building block to start establishing this roster with. So far, it's just been Malik Renew and Gabe Cupps went into the portal. I mean, I would caution Indiana fans to not freak out if the whole team goes in, because I mean we see this with coaching changes a lot. Where guys can go in and then come back. I mean, that happened with several players going into Mike Woodson's first year. So it's sort of just a way to assess your options. DeVries said today that he'll try to meet individually with all the guys. I think there's a few guys that you could feel like you want to keep. I mean, I think it'd be big if they could bring Renew back, but I think there's a potential for DeVries to really build a strong 3-point shooting team right away if he's able to get his son to come on board, and then if Luke Goody gets his medical waiver approved, they have Trent Sisley, the freshman, coming in, who I guess he'll probably also have to have conversations with the freshman recruits. But then they also have the guy from Bosnia, Zerno, who is heralded as a strong 3-point shooter. So I mean, those are 4 guys right there that and then potentially if you brought Mackenzie Mbako back. So we'll see. I mean, it's hard to say right now, like exactly what the roster is going to look like, and it also depends. Like, does DeVries think he can go out and get better players in the portal? Because I think he will have a lot of. I mean, he talked about the resources. I think he said, everything is in place here for me to win, and resources don't win, but they certainly help. I'm paraphrasing what he said there, but to that effect of you can have everything, but it's about putting the pieces together that fit. So yeah, I would expect over the next week or two. The portal officially opens on Monday, but for Indiana, guys can go in because the coaching change early. But yeah, definitely going to be a lot of movement with that in the coming days.
And Todd, you mentioned earlier that you do expect I guess the pieces to fit together a little bit better for there to be a more coherent plan when it comes to the roster assembly. Is that because you just don't think Indiana's was very good this past year, or is that a product of DeVries? Is he noted, known for that? I guess just what's your expectation of how these pieces will eventually fit together? Again, not knowing who exactly is going to transfer and who will be back and all that stuff at this point.
Well, it's a little bit of column A and column B. I mean, Mike Woodson did not piece together teams very well. I mean, the talent that he put on those teams, he just went after talent and kind of hoped that it would work out. And sometimes it did, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes from one game to the next. So I don't know that DeVries has any kind of special talent in crafting a roster, but he will craft one that makes sense for what he wants to do. I mean, my guess is a couple of the West Virginia guys are going to come over. Jonathan Powell, who was a freshman on West Virginia last year, is already in the portal. And it wouldn't surprise me if Amani Hansberry, who's an important player for West Virginia, might be a player who could come over here too. I mean, any new coach, the advantage of the portal these days is you can establish institutional knowledge right away with players that you already coached. That's what Curt Cignetti did for football. And I would be surprised if Darian DeVries didn't do it with basketball. It's easier to do with basketball. It's not as many people. So, and we'll see about the recruiting class that he was bringing into West Virginia, which was pretty highly thought of. So some of those guys could be coming here as well. Once you get that, then you figure out who you want to come back and go from there. So it'll be interesting to see how he approaches that. Time is of the essence. The portal opens Monday. He does have some days to get ready for that. And, and also to talk to the current Indiana players, some of whom he said are gone on spring break. It's spring break week Friday. But yeah, I don't know that he has any special formula in that sense, but I think he will approach it. He's not going to grab 3 different post players who have similar skill sets. He's going to be a little bit more nuanced than that.
Well, I don't want to leave without closing the door on this correctly. So final remarks from either one of you on the new head coaching hire at Indiana before we wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think Indiana got a guy who is a lot of the personality traits that we talked to are kind of a good fit, I think, for Indiana in terms of how he wants to build this out. And I am interested to see, we haven't talked about his staff yet either. Like he had Tom Ostrom was on his staff, who was also at Indiana, I think under Archie Miller. And Corey Barnett was an assistant too, and he played at Indiana. So it's kind of some interesting ties there to see how he builds, if he goes out and tries to bring in some new assistants or if he wants to keep that consistency too. Cause I think that is important. Like when you're when you're starting off at a new place, if you can kind of be able to establish that consistency, I'll be interested to see how that plays out too.
All right, Todd, if you want to take us home, final closing remarks here on the Darian DeVries hire at Indiana.
It's a fresh start. Hopefully the fans get behind it. There needs to be some fresh air in this program. It's been the rancor over the last 2 years in particular has made it not very fun to be an Indiana basketball fan, much less somebody who's around the program a lot. So fans are hungry. They want this to win. They want this to be a winner, obviously, and a winner at a high level. We'll see if DeVries is the guy for that. But I do hope that fans give him a chance, that the kind of, like I said, rancor that occurs in the fan base can be smoothed over at least for a little bit and go from there. So that's what you always hope for when you hire a new coach. And Indiana definitely needs, a little bit of renewal, and we'll see if Darian DeVries is the guy to bring it.
Well said. All right, anybody out there, check out Indiana Hoosiers on SI. These guys have been, I don't know how many things you guys have put out over the last 24 hours. I'm sure it's a lot. I know they've been busy, so appreciate their time for jumping on here and talking about the hire. And I guess we will say Tuesday for our next episode, and then we'll see if we need to jump on earlier than that or if it needs to be pushed back, I guess, at this point too. But Darian DeVries, new head coach at Indiana, and I guess spring football is still going on there. We haven't forgotten about Curt Cignetti and the Hoosiers on the gridiron.
This week it was a fortuitous bit of luck that they are not practicing this week.
Oh, there you go. Spring break week through that.
Nice break for us.
Oh, there you go. So we'll be back as soon as we need to be. If not, it'll be Tuesday next week. So thanks everybody for listening.